Okay, I'm back. I'm going to go ahead and admit everyone. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome, welcome. As folks trickle in, welcome to our week 8 lecture in our winter quarter sustainability, business, and entrepreneurship lecture series. For those who don't know me, my name is Tamsin Foucrier, and I am a faculty member here at Evergreen, and the director for the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership and Transformational Change. Today we're joined by actually a previous faculty member at Evergreen, Don Chalmers, which I'll introduce him in a moment. But before I do, a couple things just to note about the Celtic. If you can go to the next slide, please. We are in week 8 of our lecture series. So we've got one more lecture next week. Vicki Jovanovich from Sawston Wealth Management will be joining us. Next slide, please. So the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership and Transformational Change, or the Celtic, is a public service center here at Evergreen. We help support work around entrepreneurship and business development with a particular focus on sustainability and social entrepreneurship. We host this lecture series. We help support and also offer certificate programs like the Sustainable Cooperative Development Certificate here at Evergreen. We offer a variety of different courses, and we also help support and coordinate internships. So if you are interested in an internship around sustainability or business or entrepreneurship, please do reach out. You can email us at Celtic at evergreen.edu, and I'm going to ask our wonderful assistant director, Paige, to put the email address in the chat for you all. Next slide, please. This lecture series is co-hosted by Thurston Green Business, which is a certification program for local businesses in Thurston County. I believe the applications are still open and they will be closing soon. So if you are interested in applying to get certified, please do so quickly. This lecture series is funded in full by the Clean Energy Committee here at Evergreen. The Clean Energy Committee is a student-led committee with a mission to support clean energy projects and share sustainability strategies here at Evergreen. Next slide. All right, I'm gonna be quiet in a moment, but before I do, I'm going to welcome and thank our wonderful guest speaker today, Don Chalmers. For 40 years, Don has committed himself and his work to sustainable, culturally appropriate community development through both capital projects and program development. As a consultant, his clients have included tribal and other governments, nonprofits, including social enterprises, for-profits, and associations. His employment includes healthcare administration, higher education administration, and teaching, and student advocacy. As a college teacher at several institutions in Oregon, Washington, and South Dakota, Don focused on highly interactive and collaborative learning in topics as diverse as grant writing, social enterprises, law, civil rights, and integrated systems. Don, it's wonderful to have you back. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Tamsin, and thanks everybody for taking the time to be a part of our time together. I was really excited to get the call and be asked to offer some ideas and insights regarding change making, because I think the times we're facing, change making has become increasingly important. And I just hope that what I can offer today will be of help to you. I would like to, in addition to what Tamsin indicated by way of an introduction, let you know that from a practical standpoint, a lot of my work has been creating change-making organizations. So over the actually 54 years that I've been doing this kind of work, um, I've helped create nonprofits, for-profits, cooperatives, social enterprises. And I've also been, as she indicated, a teacher at Evergreen and other institutions. And I've seen the power of Evergreen students when it comes to creating change, within their community. It's really, really encouraging to see what the power that Evergreen students bring when they apply the critical thinking skills, the other skills, the learning that is part of Evergreen and the experiences that are part of Evergreen to go out to make an assessment of their community, pick and choose perhaps a thing that they would like to begin to focus in on and marshal the resources that are needed to address those things. So for me, it's an exciting opportunity. I know our time together is short, so I'd like to, begin to focus in on some things that I think might help you if you made the decision that change making, is something that you'd like to be a part of, or maybe create a more focused approach to being a change maker within your community. One of those things that I think is really important is this whole use of your market power. And it's ironic when I talk about using your market power, that today is a day where people are being asked to use your market power to have an impact. This whole idea of 24 hours without purchases, et cetera, is a clear example of what that whole idea is about. And it's also it can be a very personal choice when it comes to using your market power. To what degree do you make choices about where you shop, where you buy your toiletries, where you buy your food? Do you think about the co-op, for example, as a source of your food versus corporately owned grocery store? Do you look at Target, for example, as just one example, but where if you're not really all that aware of how these different companies are different in how they relate to the community, you may not be aware that Target, as a part of the Dayton Hudson Corporation, is also part of that corporation that provides far more corporate giving to the community than other companies. But when I'm making those kinds of choices, that has to be part of the equation that I am taking into consideration. Is okay because Dayton Hudson Foundation is so prominent in giving charitable giving to the various communities where the Target stores exist. I might choose to go to Target and buy, a product as opposed to going to perhaps a competitor, just because of the charitable nature of its parent company. Um, and I think, it would be helpful to just take a moment. Are there things that each of you think about when you make economic choices that might have an impact on the benefit to the community, just by virtue of the choices that you make? Can anybody think of an example of what that might include? Or just based on your experience, what kinds of choices do you make that allow you to use your market power to impact the betterment of the community?
Feel free to unmute if you want to share, or you can also put in the chat. I can keep an eye on the chat for you, Don, and read out things that come through. Buying local when I can afford it.
Yeah.
For me, I remember a few years back, there was a food company, Goya, that made some political statements over social media, and they're usually known for having like Latino foods and other food items. And I decided to stop purchasing after those political statements were made. So something like that.
Yeah, that's a good example. And to be frank, we're looking at this whole the DEI. For me personally, my husband and I buy a lot of products from Amazon. We also shop at Costco, and we've made the decision to focus our purchases at Costco because the shareholders made the decision to sustain DEI initiatives within that company and to diminish our purchases as best we can from other corporations like Amazon. That's just me, and I'm not advocating for anybody to take a particular posture or stance. What I'm saying is that we have market power, and that's one of the ways that we can contribute in our own way toward toward the goals that we have for our community as change makers. The other thing that we can do is get engaged in the community. And I know talking to Evergreen students about being engaged in the community is sort of preaching to the choir. But to the degree that you're able to get more involved, more engaged in the community, it gives you the ability to identify areas of need, areas of concern, where you may make the decision that, oh, yeah, I want to be able to help address that. For example, one of the students in a previous class that I taught with social enterprises recognize that there are a number of those without homes that have a real hard time getting mail. They can't use the private mail service that costs money. And so his project was to work with the local bus transit company and to look to see if he could establish cluster boxes there at the transit center that would allow people to get mail, because that was, he became aware of that problem for people that without homes, and getting notifications, getting mail from social services agencies, et cetera, was one of the challenges those people faced. And he thought that might be for him a way to begin to address that kind of a problem. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about, being immersed in the community to the degree that you're able to articulate some things that you may think I would like to be able to, um, to address that. And then what are the ways, how can I best address that as an individual? We'll talk a little bit more about how you might do that as we move down through the agenda for today. But, and I think each of us have our own way of being aware. For example, yesterday I was out at the food bank called Helping Hands, donating egg crates, egg containers, because they get bulk eggs, but they don't have the containers that they need to distribute, say, 18 eggs to a family. So that one of the ways that we could help was by regularly transferring our egg cartons to Helping Hands, and along with a little bit of a donation to the organization as well. And then, like I say, you could be aware of these things. You can be clear. Okay, well, I know what some of the needs are that exist within the community, and that's okay. That's I think a step ahead. But then the question becomes, okay, if I'm aware of these needs, what, if anything, can I do, as an individual or as a group of people to address those needs? And that's when you shift from awareness to action and begin to think about, okay, how do I address that particular issue? How do I address these things? And I'm going to share some examples both internationally and locally that illustrate how people have made those decisions. But one of the things that really is important, in terms of sustaining the energy that's oftentimes required to effectively address a problem or a concern, is the passion that you have for that particular problem or issue, right? It's like it bothers me, it makes me unhappy that that's going on, but this is at a level where I need to address this in some way. I need to use the resources that I have available to me, and perhaps drawing on resources from others to begin addressing that. That's the shift from awareness to action. And then when you think about it, you need to I think about, how do I organize? How do I organize to address this particular concern that I think I'd like to address effectively? And then we get into questions about, do you do that as an individual? And I'm going to suggest to you that even though that sounds like kind of a lonely way to do it, the examples that I'll share and the examples that peripherate from a variety of sources indicate that oftentimes it is just an individual who says, I want to address this, that makes all the difference. Sure, after they've made that initial commitment and they may recruit others to join with them, that's oftentimes what happens. But it's that individual spark, pardon me, that's individual spark within them that creates the opportunity for change to begin, to make that start. So yeah, an individual, and you could certainly do that as an individual or an individual business. For example, you could have a sole proprietorship. You could have a for-profit business that in part focuses on addressing the needs for social change. Either way, you've got some opportunity there to use you as an individual or you as a sole proprietor, as a business, to begin to address these things. You might also then come to realize that maybe the best way to address this need for change comes through an association. And frankly, if you get together on Tuesday nights and have pizza and talk about social equity, you are an association, whether you acknowledge it or not. You become an association because you have regular meetings with a common purpose, and you have people that are a part of that association. So you may not have legal structure. You don't have legal structure at that point, but you are an association and you have at least some benefit by virtue of that association. That's also a way that things get started oftentimes, is to be in a place where you and your friends coalesce around an issue or issues, and you do meet regularly to address that issue and maybe and recruit others to be part of the group. Nothing wrong with that. That's a loose association. The only thing that we all know, or we oftentimes understand, is you as an individual, or you as an association, or you as a sole proprietor for that matter, don't have any you have legal liability. And that's something that you need to take into consideration because oftentimes there are some things you're doing. You're sending Debbie out, Debbie out for pizza, and she has a fender bender. Okay, at that point, all the members of the association can become responsible for the fender bender because she was out carrying out an association purpose. No legal, no legal structure in place, but still the members of the group become individually, like we say legally, individually and severally liable for the fender bender based on the trip for the pizza. So something to take into consideration. And of course, we all know that a nonprofit corporation could also be a vehicle for you to establish a nonprofit organization. It sounds a little cumbersome perhaps, but the good news is in Washington, it's relatively easy to create a nonprofit corporation. And the benefit, of course, is that now your association or you as an individual with a nonprofit corporation have some limited liability. You're able to provide limited liability so that only the corporation is responsible for the fender bender, not the board members of the association members. And so I think, in large part, I mean, obviously the United States, is well represented when it comes to the nonprofit or NGO population around the world. But you also recognize that a nonprofit organization has some responsibilities. You need to act like a corporation. You act like a business. And the second phase of that work is becoming tax exempt. And that's another step that you'd want to take into consideration. I won't belabor it because we only have limited time, but I just want to say that thinking about that, yeah, there's some work to be done. But because of limited liability, because it creates a structure for you to move forward, um, it's not unusual for people who want to become change makers to make the decision that the nonprofit corporation, especially one that's tax exempt under Section 501(c)(3) of the tax code, is the vehicle that they want to use. I think I did a study long ago where 241 non-for-profits were established in Washington in 1 month. So it's not like, oh, look, it's a new nonprofit, every so often it's, over 200 and some created in just 1 month in just one state. And again, I don't want to be cavalier about there are plenty of responsibilities to to develop and maintain a not-for-profit. But even some people have made the decision to use a for-profit organization as a means for becoming a change maker. And in Washington, there is the standard for-profit companies that, basically their focus is for-profit, whether they're shareholders or not. It's a profit-making organization, at least they hope it is. But there is a thing called a special purpose corporation in Washington. You may have heard about it as being a B corporation, like in California, but in Washington, there is a for-profit corporation that has a special designation called a a social purpose corporation. And there, what you're doing when you create your corporation through your articles of incorporation or articles of formation, you're actually identifying some of the social purposes that'll be part of your mission, that'll be part of your focus as a social purpose corporation. And last time I checked, which has been a while, but last time I checked, there are over 500 social purpose corporations in Washington currently, even though the statute wasn't brought into being until 2012. So sometimes people think about, change making and community advocacy and that sort of thing as being pretty much the sole purview of individuals or nonprofits. But the reality is that there is that blend. There's an opportunity for a blend through the social purpose corporation, or for that matter, through a co-op, right? I mean, I mentioned the food bank or the food co-op as a Washington co-op there in Olympia. And it's a business. It typically makes money. It reinvests those dollars back into the food co-op. Um, it provides benefits to its members. So there are ways to become a change maker through a lot of different vehicles. And I just want to encourage you to think about that. If you make the leap, from awareness to action, there's a lot of vehicles that are available to you to consider when it comes to how you might organize for change making. Again, later on today, we'll be talking about some examples where people made the decisions and did some pretty amazing things as individuals. Let me stop there and see if you have any questions up to this point. Pardon me. Okay, let me share my screen. So I'm going to be moving to some URLs I want to link to. Okay. So with that introduction, I'd like to check in with you and see if there are other topics that you'd like to be sure that we cover today in the time that we have. Anything that as you read through the description of this session, that you'd like to be sure that I touch on?
Don, I did have students sort of submit some questions
Uh-huh.
beforehand, and there's quite a number of questions around your current work through Thunderhawk. If you could touch on what you do, how that came about, maybe what are
Oh,
some of the challenges, why the name Thunderhawk. There was a lot of sort of interest around that.
oh, great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. Currently, I'm working on my last project because I'm going to turn 75 in July. And so this is, this project at the Crow Nation. Their tribal college is Little Bighorn College. And there's a whole story behind that, of course. But we're working to develop a cultural center and museum there on that campus. It doesn't exist. And so it's an unmet need that I think is really important for the Apsalaka people. They call themselves Apsalaka as opposed to Crow, although they are the Crow Indian Nation. And I've been working in Indian country mm, since 1976. So 50 years or so. Started out working to help reestablish as a volunteer the Siletz tribe in Oregon. And ever since then, I've been working on tribal projects along with nonprofit projects and other things as a consultant. And luckily, I was able to bring that experience into my teaching at Evergreen and offer, as these questions suggest, offer some examples of how that all comes together. Everything from the Museum Library Research Center at the Squaxin Island Tribe, which was about a $3 million project, to the Suquamish Nations projects, including an early learning center, museum, and a longhouse. I know maybe some of you have been up to the longhouse at Suquamish. It's 12,000 square feet. Those three projects cost $19 million. And we were able to raise about 7 million of that from private and other government sources. So it's been a strong focus for me because I believe that Native communities, indigenous communities deserve the ability to come together and to celebrate, to learn from each other. And the good news is even at 75, um, each of those facilities has transformed those communities, has transformed those communities. That's what really has kept me motivated to do the work that I do. For example, at Port Gamble Sklallam, we helped them raise the money needed to build a longhouse there outside of Kingston. And one of the stories I like to tell was the young people up at the Shell station who were kind of into the gang signs and that sort of thing saw the longhouse being built, and they went down to the elders who were helping design it and decorate or provide the welcoming totems, etc. And they asked the elders, these young people asked the elders, teach us our songs, teach us our dances, teach us our language. We want to be part of the Longhouse community. And to me, that's a powerful statement to have them take the initiative. And now those young people are the ones that are teaching the young people. Over the course of the years, they've become the family members, and they've had their own children, and that's part of that Longhouse family. And now they're teaching their children the songs and dances. And when you see 35 people in that space just rock the house, if you will, with those beautiful Northwest songs. It's fantastic. If you ever get a chance to go to Suquamish and hear those songs being sung in a 12,000 square foot facility, it leaves you shaking with the power of those songs. So yeah, thank you for the question. But yeah, a lot of my work has been done in indigenous communities. My last project is this one in Montana. I think we'll be able to develop a cultural center there, which will include a house of honor or a hall of honor, an elder center, and a gift shop adjacent to the main portions of the campus there at Little Bighorn College in Crow Agency. So thanks for the questions. I appreciate that. And I'm happy to talk about things that are of interest to you because I appreciate your time together, and I'm happy to. I'm pretty good at working on the fly. That's after teaching for as long as I have. I'm actually pretty adroit at shifting focus as need be. Hopefully that gives people some insights. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a book called Rippling. Anybody familiar with this book? Maybe some of you are. If I would ask you to read one book about change making, the current edition of this book, Rippling, would be the one I would ask you to read. It's enjoyable. It's a pretty easy read, but it's got a lot to offer. This is by Bev Schwartz, and it's called Rippling: How Social Entrepreneurs Spread Innovation Throughout the World. And so I would really recommend this book to you if you're interested in this topic. She is an amazing writer, and she does a fantastic job of presenting change makers in a way that you can really help them understand and appreciate what their work is all about. Oops, that won't work. Are you still able to see the screen? I had to move from one screen to another. There we go.
Yes, we see your desktop.
Okay, great. So when we talk about change making from her perspective, from the perspective of her research, what they see that are five things that are really important are restructuring industry norms, shifting the norms within an industry. That's a really important part of change making. Changing market dynamics, changing the relationship of consumers to businesses, making consumers businesses, definitely changing market dynamics.
Rob,
Using
I
market.
hate to interrupt. Are we supposed to be seeing a document?
Oh, okay.
We can only just see your desktop with your icons. We can't see the doc. We were
Oh,
able
okay.
to see it,
Let
but we
me let
can't
me
see it
put it
anymore.
back where it was. Maybe that'll make it.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, again, restructuring industry norms, changing market dynamics, using market forces to create social value. That's another key part of change making. Really important. Advancing full citizenship. And just parenthetically, that example is touched on in Rippling because within a certain society, if a woman's spouse dies, the male spouse dies, she is left penniless. The estate did not go to her. Okay. So the spouse dies, she may have children still at home, and the estate goes to the spouse's family. She received none of that estate. This change maker made the decision to change that, to work through the legal system to make a change in that, moving toward full citizenship for women within that Nepalese community, and then cultivating empathy. Those are the four things that Bev Schwartz identifies as basic tenets, if you will, of effective change making. And those are powerful things to think about. They really are, because you're going to see examples of those in a variety of settings when it comes to some of these examples. So, for example, here, Selco in India, bringing solar energy solutions to underserved communities, definitely changing the dynamics there in terms of energy. The 24-hour helpline for children in India, their Childline India, and we could go on to a variety of these things. What I'd like to do is offer these, and I'll put this outline in the chat for you to draw down on toward the end of today. But each of these examples of where an individual made the decision, and this is the key for me, where the individual made the decision to start a program of this nature. Yeah, it expanded, substantially over the time of the project, but each of these people started it, if you will. And so let me give you an example here where Ursula Sladek was an individual living in Bavaria. And the area that she was living in was pretty much reliant on nuclear energy. Okay. And it was that time that you had Chernobyl. And you may have noticed with the conflict, the war in Ukraine, that Chernobyl is still an active issue based on occasional bombardment, et cetera. Sorry, I can't pronounce it. The nuclear facility in Japan that had the meltdown was also very important to her in terms of making a decision to make a change in that community. And so she established a cooperative utility, and she and her husband started it, and they went out and identified people who would like to become co-op members. All right. So they used a cooperative model as their business form. And they spent several years developing this organization, but they ultimately bought out the utility. And the utility now focuses on only renewable and sustainable energy sources. All right. And I thought, well, that's quaint. That's a nice thing. Wonder if it's still around. And the answer is not only is it still around, it's now providing energy to throughout Germany. And that model has been successful enough where it's been replicated in other countries. So there's a URL for you if you'd like to get more information about it. That's a pretty good example of where basically two people said it's time for us to refocus our energy, for our community, for our region, away from nuclear energy and into renewable energy. And again, through a number of years of work, creating an organization, creating membership within that organization that ultimately converted it to a renewable energy system. Another example I wanted to share with you was an example called the Rickshaw Bank. Okay. What was happening was people who were rickshaw operators, they call them pullers in India, were were coming from rural communities looking for a job, and they were being recruited by the mafia, if you will, to become pullers, become rickshaw pullers. And the hitch was that every person who wanted to be a rickshaw puller had to rent the rickshaw from the gang, from the mafia. Okay. So this veterinarian, the doctor veterinarian, basically made the decision that that needed to be remedied. He felt uncomfortable being pulled around. So what he did was he basically organized the rickshaw pullers. He helped design with money from the banks. He got funding from 4 banks, and they redesigned the rickshaw so it was lighter, it was more ergonomically accommodating, and he set it up so that each of the pullers could buy, with the money they were spending on rent, they could ultimately buy their rickshaw outright. Okay, so now all the money that they made after the first year or so was money that went to them because they had paid off their rickshaw. But he didn't think that was enough. And so instead, what he did was he also set up, again, with the help from the banks, he set it up so they had a group insurance plan. So, because oftentimes when they had a collision, the person who was collided with would use their status, their cultural status, and they would basically make the rickshaw owner responsible for the accident, regardless of who was responsible. So they bought an insurance policy to provide for liability insurance. They bought health insurance for each person. And they were so successful that the people basically could look to thinking about buying a home for the first time in their lives. Some of these people have been pullers for 16, 20 years. And now this particular rickshaw bank converted their lives entirely just by taking the initiative and making decisions about how to remedy some of the challenges, the problems that they were facing. So amazing, amazing story. The second to the last is Ciudad Saludable. And this was a situation where the woman found people picking through the garbage in Peru because that's how they sustained their life. They were picking out plastic bottles, metals, whatever it might be. That was their source of income. And just real briefly, what she made the decision was, how do we convert this? How do we convert this? Because in fact, a number of areas within the Lima, Peru area didn't have any garbage pickup at all. There were just mounds and mounds of garbage that, because of that particular locale and the economics of that locality, nobody was picking up the garbage. So she transformed it. She transformed it. She gave individuals the opportunity to collect garbage on a tricycle with a large bucket. She created renewables that provided income for each of the families that were part of this organization. she converted it in such a fashion that her project was replicated throughout South America. And last I heard, there was also a pilot project using her same approach in Georgia, in the United States, to provide for a better garbage management and also recycling. Also, that same project separated organic from non-organic material, and allowed that then to provide support for the various farms that are part of that community. So tremendous, tremendous change, all initiated by a single individual. If you go to that website, you'll also see, new staff has been brought on. She's still involved in the project after all those years, but she's also now has staff that are part of the management team for her organization. And then the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to a local example, you may have heard of them. It's called Alafia. And Alafia was an individual from a country in Africa that got together with a woman from what they say rural Washington to create a company, an LLC that manufactures different kinds of cosmetics, shampoos, conditioners, soaps, lotions, what have you, from shea butter exported from Togo. And their support there provides people in Togo using traditional ways of extracting the shea butter, gives them the opportunity to export that at more than fair trade rates. In other words, the prices they're paying go beyond fair trade rates. But the reason I wanted to bring them up today was because not only do they have the LLC that imports the shea butter, manufactures these products, and distributes them nationally now, they also have an organization, a nonprofit foundation that they're also responsible for that does things like provide eyeglasses in Togo, bicycles in Togo, has built schools in Togo, has helped with maternal health care. So they provide what I call a blended approach of a for-profit LLC that is the business arm, and then the nonprofit foundation, the 501(c)(3) organization that provides that facet of their work. And of course, the LLC from time to time contributes toward that non-for-profit foundation so it can continue to do its maternal health care and other projects in Togo and throughout portions of Africa. So there is so much potential here when it comes to being able to, organize around a problem or issue or concern that you think is something you'd like to address, finding an appropriate format for that, an appropriate organizational structure that is comfortable for you and is designed to help address the problem, whether it's a cooperative, a for-profit, a social purpose corporation, et cetera. All of those things can come together to address a problem that can be as simple as a mailbox for people without homes, or as complex as converting a nuclear power grid to a renewable powered grid. Lots of opportunity there. And so I know we're to the time where it's time to open it up for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, I graduated from law school in 1975. I was working as an advocate for students at the University of Oregon. The people that I knew from the Native American Student Union there at the University of Oregon were all working to try to restore the tribal status of the Siletz tribe. At that time, the Siletz tribe was operating out of a single wide trailer, and that's about it. And they were all volunteers, basically trying to restore because the U.S. government had made the decision in the 1950s and early 60s. Basically, the solution to the quote Indian problem was to terminate tribes altogether, and just to declare them they don't exist any longer. So the work that we were doing was designed to restore was to restore the tribal status, to request federal recognition of the Celeste tribe. At that time, I was also invited to a sweat lodge ceremony from a Lakota friend that basically invited me to show up to a sweat lodge in Corvallis, Oregon, and then he intentionally stayed home. So I was the only quote white guy at the sweat lodge ceremony, and I came in saying, "Oh, I'm here. Rod said I should come, and we don't know any Rod. Rod's not here. Who the heck are you?" So those things together kind of started my path of working in indigenous country or in Indian country in 1976. And then after I left a position at as a healthcare hospital healthcare system administrator, set up my own company called Sparrowhawk, and basically my first client was the Shoalwater Bay tribe, and I was having dinner with some people at their home, and they indicated that the Shoalwater Bay tribe needed some help getting funding for their education projects, and so in 19 see, I must have been 1994. I got reintegrated with the tribal. I still have been actively involved in the sweat lodge and other Lakota ceremonies. But in '94, I opened my own company and started as a consultant to tribes based on somebody saying, "I think you could help us. Would you be willing to help us?" And it was kind of we'll pay you in fry bread and chickens or something, you know, that kind of thing because there wasn't a lot of money. Ironically, one of the ways we helped them raise money for their education program was to go to Fort Lewis and to draw down an 80-foot yellow crane that they could lease for $800 a day. And so that became an income source for them to use because at that time and currently tribes, along with the state of Washington and others, can draw down federal surplus property for free. And so Shoalwater Bay, a bunch of us went up and we started picking things that we wanted the Shoalwater Bay tribe to get, Jeeps and this 80-foot crane and a couple boats and a bunch of surplus property that then was turned into income sources for the tribe. But yeah, that's as frank as I can be. That's how I got started with Sweat Lodge and wanting to help restore the Celeste tribe. Now, of course, the Celeste tribe has its casino on the coast called Chinook Winds. It doesn't operate out of a single white trailer any longer. I think that recognition of that tribe gave them 3,500 acres and hunting and fishing rights was all that was the government was willing to give them at that time in '76. Yeah, I think a lot of times the dollars that come from these come from within the group. And it's interesting that, you got to have money to make money kind of thing. No, I don't think that's necessarily true. But I've been part of, we've all been part of car washes, right? We've all done the kind of grassroots fundraising that is inherent in just generating a few dollars. It doesn't take a lot of money to get started. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is there are charitable organizations, foundations, for example, that are all about startups. Okay, that's what they do. And so, how do you effectively go out and get startup dollars? One of the ways that you do that is by making your project, again, making people aware of your project. And that sounds like kind of marketing, not so much fundraising. But a lot of these more progressive funders, including Gates and others, that are, they have tremendous capacity. I mean, I think Gates is doing 2.83 billion dollars in grants, for example, on a yearly basis. But what they're doing is they are in the community and they are seeing people who are doing good things and they are inviting people to apply. And when that happens, creates a partnership between you and the funder. And that partnership can produce tremendous results because not only is it money from from a partner, from a funding partner, but it's also expertise. It's also, working in collaboration with staff to help you become successful because believe it or not, these funders want you to be successful. They have a reason to want you to be successful. There's a practical reason and there is a social reason for them wanting you to be successful. And the result of that is that if you can, if you create, and I hate to use the word buzz because it sounds kind of utilitarian, if you will, but in the shorthand, yeah, buzz. Okay, hey, I heard about this project in Olympia where some Evergreen students have got together with some people from the community, and they're addressing this particular problem, and they're becoming very successful in a microcosm fashion. Maybe we should take a look and see what else could be done to expand on that model because the other thing that funders are interested in is replication of successful projects, even if they're just in its infancy, even if they're just embryonic, if they show promise that, if you could build with some resources, you could build on this little embryonic project. That's definitely a flag that says, well, let's take a little larger look at this and see if in fact there might be some opportunities. And it has a lot to do with leveraging, as I think some of you already know. Taking some small resources, a small nest egg, if you will, and finding ways to say, look, funder, if we have this to put forward, and it might be volunteer labor is what you're offering as your contribution to that project. And can you provide this piece of the pie to help make this project forward? So there's lots of principles that are built into funding these kinds of things. The leveraging is one, the creating the buzz that draws attention from the funders. Uh, you know, we had a situation, I remember with Squaxin, where they had a celebration of, the opening of their museum, or I'm sorry, it was basically the opening the ground of their museum with a drumming ceremony. And we invited some funders to come and be part of basically the celebration of that particular ceremony. And a number of those funders got pretty excited about what was happening there at Squaxin. One in particular said, we'd like to help support Squaxin's education program. And out of that, the tribe provided that foundation with 6 ideas of things that might be useful for the education of tribal young people. And the foundation said, yeah, we'll support, that particular activity with a grant. It became an interactive conversation. It wasn't just an arm's length request, put it in the box, turn the handle, and hope some money comes out. It was an interpersonal conversation that generated, that kind of support. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, if you want to be in this field, if you want to work in this area, part of the success you can have is immersing yourself in this field, right? There are organizations, for example, in Washington that bring together those who are actively doing the good work and those that are funding it. And, for example, Association of Fundraising Professionals Washington, for example, is an organization that has regular sessions that include funders forums, where funders are in a more informal, pass out your business cards, talk to you in the hall kind of a conversation mode than they would be if you met them in their offices, for example. And I know, having been on the board of that parent organization from long ago, that the scholarships that are available for people to attend their annual and semi-annual activities go wanting because nobody applies for them. When I was on the board, we raised $12,500 at lunch just to provide scholarships for students or for people that wanted to attend these various conferences, and people weren't applying for them. So even though there might be a $125 cost to attend one of these conferences, it's likely that, if a person applied, they could receive a scholarship to go to Seattle and be a part of that conversation, or go to Tacoma, for example, and be a part of the conversation, because you're immersing yourself in the environment where people have these conversations, where people listen for, hey, who's doing good work in Olympia, or who's doing good work in Tenino, um, and that we have interest in that. Let's keep our ear to the ground. And I can assure you that a number of the projects that are sponsored and supported by even big players like Gates came from that kernel within the community that came out of that conversation. Wow, that's a great question. I have to admit, I'm a Copilot user. I use Copilot every day. And I ask it questions and I generate responses and I copy and paste those. I do attribute them, of course, but I copy and paste those just to speed up the process, just to make it happen faster. And so I have to admit that that bias, um, because it's helpful to me. You know, we were going to try to do a survey for the project in Montana of the skill sets for a cultural center and museum among the volunteers that are part of our volunteer cohort. We were struggling to find out, what are the skills, what can we offer by way of skill sets that people could check off the box in that Survey Monkey survey. So I go to Copilot and I say, what are the skills that would be beneficial for volunteers to have in support of a Crow, and I said Crow at that time, Crow Cultural Center and Museum. Boom, there are 10 skill sets and with attribution. Now I could have spent an hour or so kind of cooking those up for myself because I'm pretty much aware of what the skill sets might look like, but that happened in less than 30 seconds. Right. And then I can take that document, I can analyze it, I can adjust it, I can make it more specific. But ironically, the Copilot did add certain co-attributes in terms of language, culture, history that I thought were appropriate. I I guess my short answer is it's a tool to help expedite things that has to go through a filter. It can't be, okay, well, I'm just going to cut and paste it and send it off to the client and go, well, that's that. I need to read it. I need to analyze it. I need to use my cognitive capacity to say, does this make any sense? Right? Because we know that the algorithms that are being used are just that. And the 30 seconds that it took, was because it was extracting information from a variety of sources that it plunked into that, one-page document. So taking that and making it a part of, just here's the client, here's the answer to your question, probably not the best approach. But using that as a way to kind of get in the ballpark and then and scrutinize it and give it the benefit of your experience, I think that's probably going to be a way to move things forward in a good fashion. That when it comes to applications, for example, grant applications, you're going to see virtually all federal applications are online. Most of the private sector funders are moving toward to online applications. How does that impact the ability for you to you know does that make sense? Are there AI applications that will help you with that? I would be very cautious about that because I think that it's not yes, I think funders are going to be using AI to look for keywords, for example, but it's inherent in the person applying for resources to also be tied to mission. you know how many times have I seen an organization get a grant that's outside of mission, outside of the agreed to mission, and have it basically cause the organization to splinter because board members are in disagreement about whether we just want the money or we want the money that supports the mission that we believe in. That's another way to think about it, right? Because you get into an expedient, and yeah, everything's good. It just happens, and then okay, board members, we just got a $25,000 grant from Philip Morris to support our food bank. Anybody got heartburn about that? We it went right through. They're giving every food bank $25,000. Well, I was on the board of the food bank when that question was raised there in Olympia, and it was not a 12-0 vote on whether Philip Morris money would be acceptable for a food bank in that town. So I think your question is important. I think it's something that's going to be a source of ongoing conversation. I can see, a full conference on that question, with a variety of voices coming forward. I guess I would just offer some caution about the magic of AI being tempered in some fashion, by using the cognitive power of you and your colleagues to use it in a responsible fashion. I think you're going to find funders using more and more of it, but that still means that you need to tie to applications, other initiatives that are consistent, that honor the mission, the mission, the vision, and the values and the goals of the organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause here and just invite our audience members in the chat or emojis or even unmuting if you can say thank you. Don, thank you so much for being with us today, continuing to be a part of our community. Once a greener, always a greener, whether you're student, staff, or faculty. It's wonderful to have you back. And thank you so much for your work and your wisdom and your expertise.
Well, you're more than welcome. I did put the outline in the chat, so if people want to download it, you're welcome to do that. And you'll be able to get those URLs as well if you have further interest in any of the examples that I gave.